She said, "I can't have children." The cowboy smiled. "Good, I've got enough kids for both." Wyoming, 1886. The last light of summer drifted across the wide valley, laying a golden sheen over the dust and sage. The wind carried the dry scent of horses and hay, whispering through the fences that ringed the Bennett Ranch. Out on the edge of town, people spoke softly about this place. "That's where the quiet man lives, the one with all the little ones." Not. Annabeth Coyle stood at the wooden gate, her gloved hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her dress was plain cotton, travel-worn, the color of earth after rain. She had the look of someone who had seen sorrow and refused to let it undo her. At 28, she carried herself with quiet grace and the faint, stubborn light of hope. The door opened, and Colt Bennett filled the frame. He was tall, shoulders broad from years of labor, skin weathered bronze by sun and dust. His gaze was steady, calm, but not cold. He said nothing for a moment, studying her as though measuring truth itself. Annabeth straightened her posture. "Mr. Bennett," she began softly, "I was told you have children here. I'm a teacher. I came to offer lessons, reading, writing, numbers, if you'd allow it." Colt leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. His tone was even. "You ever had children of your own?" The question caught her breath short. The truth pressed like a stone behind her ribs. After a pause, she answered quietly, "I cannot have children, but I will raise them with the love of a mother." For a long moment, there was no sound but the creak of wood and the wind outside. Then, Colt's expression shifted. Something softened. He gave a small, wry smile that wasn't pity, only plain acceptance. "Good," he said at last. "I've got enough kids for both." He stepped aside and motioned her to follow. They crossed the yard toward the corrals, sunlight flaring off the tin roof of the barn. "Eli," he called. A boy of about 10 turned, sturdy and sharp-eyed. Beside him, a smaller boy, Finn, maybe 5 or 6, tried to copy his brother's stance, nearly tripping over his own boots. 2 girls played near a bucket, Nora, a gentle-faced child of 7, and tiny Lottie, just 3, clutching a wooden doll with missing buttons for eyes. The children stopped their play and stared at Annabeth with the open curiosity of those not yet taught to hide it. Then, as if satisfied, they returned to their laughter and their dust-covered games. Colt watched them for a moment, pride tucked quietly beneath his calm. "You can teach them in the parlor," he said. "The oldest is headstrong. The youngest, she walks in her sleep sometimes." Annabeth smiled faintly. "They're beautiful," she said, meaning it. Then, hesitantly, "They're all yours." Colt's gaze followed the children. His reply came low, almost thoughtful. "Enough to call them my own." She nodded, accepting it as truth. There was a tenderness in the way he looked at them that needed no further explanation. When the day waned, Colt showed her to a small room beside the kitchen. The walls were plain wood, the bed narrow but clean. A lamp flickered weakly on the table, and beside it hung a half-finished knitted shawl, soft, child-sized, still waiting for the next row of stitches. Annabeth set her satchel down, fingers brushing the yarn. She could almost feel the warmth of small hands that once touched it. She stepped out to the porch for air. The world had turned lavender with dusk. Across the yard, she saw Colt carrying little Lottie in his arms. He moved with surprising gentleness, setting the child in a cot near the barn window. He pulled the blanket to her chin, brushed her hair aside, and stood there a moment longer than he needed to. Annabeth watched, the fading light catching the shine of his hair. Her voice came in a whisper only the wind could keep. "If there's a father like that, no child would ever have to wonder who they are." And as night drew its calm veil over the land, something quiet but certain stirred in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt the faint pulse of belonging, not because she could give life, but because, perhaps here, she could give love, and be allowed to stay. The first morning at Bennett Ranch began with silence. Annabeth rose early, the sky still pale above the ridgelines. A kettle already hissed on the stove, and beside it, Someone had left a bottle of warmed milk wrapped in cloth. No note, no explanation, just thoughtfulness made visible. The children eyed her at breakfast, curious but cautious. They whispered to each other, and when she tried to join, they scattered like quail. But their eyes followed her, wide and waiting. She did not push. She watched where they played, how they moved. By noon, she had smoothed out a space in the dirt with a stick, drawing letters and shapes. She hummed old tunes while showing them how C curled like a cat's tail, how S slithered like a snake. By the second afternoon, they started sitting nearby. By the third, they were tracing letters with their own fingers. Colt never commented, but he passed through the parlor each day, nodding once when he saw them sitting still. He was not a man of smiles, but there was something gentler in the way he moved when they were near. Lottie, the smallest, had a habit of wandering at night. Twice, Annabeth found her standing at the foot of the stairs, eyes half closed, lips murmuring a song no one had taught her. Each time, Annabeth lifted her gently, carried her back, and settled her beneath the blankets. She never woke fully. One night, Annabeth sat beside her cot and sang an old lullaby from her childhood. Lottie's hand curled around her finger like a promise. The moment stayed with her longer than sleep. On the fourth morning, as sunlight spilled into the kitchen, Finn wandered in with one boot on backwards and a shirt buttoned wrong. He gave her a lopsided grin. She helped him fix the buttons, then let him show her the new word he had spelled with pebbles near the well. Tree. She clapped. He beamed. The house breathed differently with her in it. She learned to read their rhythms, how Nora twirled her braid when nervous, how Eli lingered at the edge of every conversation like a shadow waiting to speak, how they looked to Colt when unsure, and how he answered more with nods than words. One afternoon she found herself scrubbing tin plates by the pump. The children were down by the stream, skipping rocks. She turned toward the porch and stopped. Colt was sitting near the door with a needle in hand, his fingers thick and clumsy over a torn sleeve. The shirt belonged to Finn. She recognized the green checked pattern. He pricked his thumb, muttered, then tried again. She said nothing, just watched. He looked up once, caught her eyes, then glanced down again. "He likes this one," he murmured. She nodded. "It suits him." He did not smile, but he kept sewing. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Annabeth stepped outside to clear her head. The moon hung low, soft over the hills. She heard Colt's boots behind her. "You're good with them," he said. She looked out toward the barn. "They make it easy." He folded his arms. "Not always." Annabeth glanced back toward the house, where 4 small lives slept safely. She whispered, "No, not always, but worth it." He nodded once. That was all. Inside, the fire crackled low, and the shawl by her bed waited, still unfinished. But the house no longer felt like a stranger's. It felt lived in, and, slowly, it began to feel like hers too. Wyoming, late summer. The air was thick with heat and the smell of horses. The children played near the west fence, laughter, clattering boots, the rustle of dry grass. Annabeth was sorting books by the parlor window when a sharp cry sliced through the quiet. "Colt!" She rushed outside. Nora lay at the foot of the paddock fence, clutching her arm, her face pale with pain. Colt was already there, his voice frantic and unfamiliar. "I told her, God, don't move, Nora, don't move." She dropped to her knees beside them. "Let me see." The girl's arm was bent wrong, bone or joint, she didn't know yet, but Nora was trembling, biting her lip hard enough to draw blood. Colt's hands hovered in the air. For once the man who always seemed unshakable was visibly shaken. "I didn't, she was just climbing, she... Help me find 2 straight pieces of wood, quick." He scrambled back, ripping a fence slat in 2. His movements were wild, breath coming sharp. Annabeth tore her own apron into strips, placed the makeshift splint gently along the break. "It's going to hurt, baby," she whispered to Nora, "but you're brave, I know that." The girl nodded through her tears. Annabeth tied the splint tight and even, wiped Nora's forehead with her sleeve, and looked up. Colt had fallen silent, kneeling across from her. His eyes didn't leave Nora, but they were full of something else too: grief, guilt, awe. "I've never seen someone who's not a mother," he said, voice low. "Be so much like one." She looked at him but said nothing. Nora whimpered. Annabeth kissed her brow. "The worst part's over. Let's get you inside, sweetheart." Colt carried her, cradled in his arms like something precious and breakable. Annabeth followed, gathering the strips of cloth and what was left of her composure. They laid Nora in the spare bed. Annabeth cooled her with a damp cloth, made a tonic for the pain, stroked her hair until sleep took over. Colt stood in the doorway the whole time, silent, still. Later that night, long after the children had gone quiet, Annabeth sat alone in her room. She opened a small box wrapped in linen. Inside, a child's silk ribbon, frayed at the edges, stitched with one name: Clara. She touched it with gentle fingers, but for the first time in years, no tears came. Only a smile, small, aching, and real. The weeks passed quietly, filled with letters traced in chalk, berry-stained fingers, and the rough hum of Colt's boots crossing the porch. The children had folded Annabeth into their lives as though she had always been there. She mended torn hems, patched scraped knees, braided hair, and drew letters in the dirt with a stick, while Nora read aloud, and Finn sang off-key beside her. Colt gave her the kitchen without question, and when a decision was needed, whether to sell the sorrel mare or keep it another month, he looked to her first. There were still few words between them, but what remained unsaid had begun to matter just as much as what was. Then one morning, the sound of a second horse broke the rhythm of daily life. A man in a dark coat rode into the yard. His boots hit the earth with practiced authority, and he produced a folded set of papers from his saddlebag before removing his hat. His voice was clipped, formal. "Mr. Bennett, I'm here on behalf of the Territory Welfare Office." Colt stepped forward, nodding once. "You're a bit far out from the courthouse, aren't you?" "There's been a complaint," the man replied. "You've got 4 minors residing here. According to county records, none bear your name nor share your blood." Annabeth stepped onto the porch, heart pounding. The man continued, "You're not recognized as a legal guardian. There's concern this property doesn't meet the qualifications for lawful care. In 10 days' time, we're required to relocate the children to the Cheyenne orphanage." Colt's jaw clenched. He said nothing, only folded the notice slowly in his hands. Annabeth's voice broke through the silence. "There must be a mistake. These children—" The man shook his head. "Ma'am, I don't make the rules. I just carry them." When he rode off, dust trailing behind like smoke, the yard felt hollow. That night, Annabeth found Colt sitting alone on the porch, the children already tucked in. He sat unmoving, gaze fixed on the stars. She sank into the seat beside him. The quiet stretched long, then he spoke. "I'm not their father. Not by blood. Eli, I found wandering after a barn fire. Nora was left at a church doorstep. Finn, his mother, died in the epidemic last spring. Lottie's father was hanged for horse theft. She was barely 2 months old." He paused, voice roughened by something deeper than dust. "I can't make a family the way others do, but I saw 4 kids with nowhere to go and figured I could be a place to land." Annabeth reached over, laid her hand over his. "You became that, more than most men ever try." He turned to her, eyes unreadable. "They'll take them, won't they?" "No," she said simply, "not if I have anything to say about it." Inside the house, the tension crept into the children's bones. They watched the adults with wide eyes, whispering in corners. One evening, Finn looked up from his half-finished drawing and asked, "Are we going to be sent away?" Annabeth knelt beside him, brushing his hair back. "No one's sending you anywhere, sweetheart. But that man said we don't belong here." She took a breath, steady. "Sometimes the people with the loudest papers don't know a thing about families, and sometimes we have to remind them." In the nights that followed, she lay awake listening to the wind rattle the eaves. The home that had once felt so safe now felt like it sat atop a threadbare rope bridge, swaying under forces beyond their control. But even as fear curled its fingers around her ribs, she began to write, to neighbors, to the preacher, to anyone who had once sat in her clinic or shared a story on the church steps. And quietly, word began to spread. Inside the house, nothing changed. Lottie still sleepwalked, and Colt still left the kettle on the stove before dawn. But between them all was something more now, not just love, but the kind forged when everything is at risk, and still, they choose to stay. Annabeth had come to teach. But now, she fought to keep the very thing she never thought she'd find again, a place to belong. The storm rolled in like a living thing, low thunder crawling across the valley, wind tugging hard at the eaves of the house. Annabeth had lit every lantern she could find, their trembling flames casting long shadows across the walls. In the parlor, Lottie lay curled against Annabeth's chest, her skin burning, her breath shallow. She whimpered in half-sleep, one hand clutching the collar of Annabeth's dress. Colt stood in the doorway, silent as always, but there was something different in the way he held himself, rigid, bracing. His eyes never left the little girl's face. Annabeth looked up, her fevers rising, fast. He nodded once. "I can ride." Her voice cracked. "Colt, the river's near over. A freight wagon was swept clean off that bridge just last week." "I know," he said. His voice was calm, but underneath it was iron. "But I know where the doctor keeps a spare kit. If I do not bring back help tonight—" "You'll drown," she said, rising halfway, her arms still around Lottie. "Or worse. You'll get there, and the storm will cut you off from coming back." Colt moved closer. He knelt by the hearth, rested one calloused hand on Lottie's small back, the other on Annabeth's shoulder. "You can take care of all four better than I ever could," he said quietly. "But this is the part that is mine to do." Annabeth didn't speak. She couldn't. Her hand found his, squeezed it hard. The wind howled against the window pane. Then he was up, pulling on his coat, tying the oilskin tight under his chin. He grabbed the reins of the strongest gelding, threw the saddle without a word, and disappeared into the rain with only the dim glow of lantern light to see him off. Inside, time slowed to a terrible crawl. Annabeth laid Lottie back down, sponging her skin with ginger water, whispering songs into the crook of her neck. The other children hovered nearby, Eli pacing, Finn sitting motionless on the stairs, Nora biting her thumbnail until it bled. At one point Finn asked, barely audible over the rain, "Is Pa coming back?" Annabeth's heart twisted. She gathered him into her free arm, held him close. "If it's for one of you," she whispered, "he would ride through anything." Minutes passed like hours. Thunder growled low in the belly of the sky. Lottie's limbs twitched, her lips moved, calling Annabeth's name without sound. Then, hoofbeats. Faint, then louder. Not just one set, two. Annabeth rushed to the door, threw it open into the storm, and there he was, Colt, drenched and pale, mud up to his knees, water streaming from his coat. He was leading a second horse. The doctor rode behind, clinging to his saddle with one hand, his satchel in the other. Colt nearly collapsed in the doorway. Annabeth caught him by the arm. "I got him," he managed, breath ragged. "Got the kit, too." She nodded, already guiding the doctor inside. By morning, Lottie's fever had broken. She lay wrapped in blankets, her lashes heavy but her color returning. The house was quiet but filled with the kind of stillness that follows calamity, the hush of relief. Colt sat slumped in the corner chair, boots still wet, coat half off, fast asleep with one hand draped across his lap. Annabeth stood in the doorway and watched him for a long moment. The door knocked just after sunrise. Two men from the county stood there, hats in hand, boots clean. One held a sealed envelope. "We've received confirmation," the man said. "Your petition's been reviewed. Community testimony came in strong. And the letter," he paused, glancing at Annabeth. "From Miss Coyle, that sealed it." He passed her the letter. "The removal order is rescinded pending final approval. The children may stay." Behind her, footsteps padded across the wooden floor. Finn had heard. "Are we staying?" he asked. Annabeth crouched to his level and smiled, tears in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, you're home." And somewhere behind them, Colt stirred awake, and for the first time in a long while, let himself believe it was true. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered, in the creak of the porch floorboards, in the way the wind now felt gentler, kinder. A week later, the letter arrived. It came sealed in an official envelope with the county stamp, the kind of letter that used to bring fear. This time, Colt opened it with steady fingers, but as he read, his hands began to tremble. "They approved it," he murmured, barely above a whisper. "It's done." Annabeth stepped closer. "What does it say exactly?" He handed it to her, but she only glanced down once before her eyes filled. "Legal guardianship confirmed," she read softly. "Colt Bennett, sole provider and protector. Annabeth Coyle, co-caretaker, responsible for education and well-being." The children were already crowding around, sensing something important. Annabeth knelt, pulled them close one by one. "You're staying," she said gently. "No more questions, no more goodbyes. We're a family now." They didn't understand all the words, but they understood the tears in her eyes, and the way Colt stood nearby, one hand resting on Eli's shoulder. That night, they cried not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of being wanted. In the kitchen, where a batch of cornbread had burned slightly at the edges, where the lamplight flickered soft against the old stone walls, something settled, not just peace, belonging. Days passed quieter, lighter. Colt and Annabeth moved through the house, like two people finally allowed to exhale. He started asking her things, small things at first. "You think we ought to move the crib into the other room? Should we teach Finn his letters first, or numbers?" She answered with a smile, a nod, sometimes a touch on his arm. One night, she invited him to sit at the table. He usually ate on the porch, with his boots half off and his mind elsewhere. But this time he stayed. They ate stew and flatbread. She told a story that made Nora laugh so hard she snorted. Colt looked up, surprised by the sound, then chuckled himself, low and genuine. Later, as he rose to leave, she reached up to fix the collar of his shirt. Her fingers brushed the edge of his jaw, rough with stubble, warm with sun. They froze in that moment. Neither spoke, neither moved, too quickly. One morning, she didn't come down. Colt stood in the kitchen, glancing at the cold stove, the empty kettle. He found her still in bed, exhausted, cheeks flushed, not with fever, but simple weariness. So he tried. He burned the toast, overcooked the eggs, the coffee came out black as night and twice as bitter, but he set it all on the table with care. And beside it, a folded note in his square handwriting. "Everything you do for them, today, let me do for you." When she came downstairs and found it, she didn't speak. Just pressed the note to her chest and closed her eyes for a moment longer than necessary. That night, Annabeth rocked Lottie beside the fire, her small hand resting on the child's curls. Colt stood nearby, silent, watching. "I'm not much for big words," he said after a while, eyes on the flames. "But I was thinking, if you were to stay longer, I think this place might become something good, for all of us, for me too." She didn't answer, not with words. As she passed him, her hand found his, warm, gentle. And it stayed there a beat too long to be accidental. He looked down, she looked up, and neither said a thing. Because some things don't need to be spoken. Some love grows not in declarations, but in quiet dinners, in burned toast, in shared silence, in the simple, silent act of not letting go. Winter came early that year, hard, sharp, and unrelenting. The frost arrived before the pumpkins were gone from the porch, and within a week, the ground was iron. Snow fell in thick, steady sheets that buried the fields, drifted against the barn, and silenced the woods. Colt stood in the doorway one morning, scarf already tied tight at his neck, saddlebag slung over his shoulder. Eli was behind him, bundled in his coat, holding the reins of the horse with a grip too determined for a 10-year-old. "We'll be back in 2 days," Colt said simply. "Town's low too, but Olson owes me. We'll manage something." Annabeth didn't argue. She handed him a wrapped bundle of bread and jerky, her eyes on his face. "Be careful." His gaze softened. "Always." Then they rode off, silhouettes swallowed slowly by the white horizon. The snow didn't stop. By the end of the second day, the wind had turned sharp enough to peel bark. By the third, Annabeth's knuckles bled from chopping wood. The animals were restless. Finn asked twice where Pa was. Nora helped stir the stew with trembling hands. Annabeth didn't show fear, not in front of them. But when the lamps went out and the children were tucked beneath layers of quilts, she sat by the hearth and whispered prayers she hadn't said since her boy was taken from her. Then, just before dawn on the fourth morning, hoofbeats. She bolted upright and flung open the door. Colt stumbled in, dragging a half-frozen Eli behind him. Both were blue-lipped, soaked through, but breathing. Annabeth rushed to them, her voice low but urgent. "Get inside, strip the coats. Hot water now." She wrapped them in wool, forced broth between their lips, rubbed warmth back into stiff fingers. Eli's eyes fluttered, met hers, and he managed a small, hoarse, "Sorry." She didn't answer, just kissed his forehead. That night, once the fire was steady and the house warm again, she crept into the kitchen for more wood. Colt was already there, standing in the half-light with a towel around his neck and steam still rising from his shoulders. His eyes met hers, and in that instant, everything broke loose inside her. "You scared me," she said, voice shaking. He stepped forward, gently, like approaching a spooked colt. "I'm sorry." Her breath hitched. I thought I lost you." "I know." She pressed a fist to her mouth, turned away, but he reached out, hand settling on her shoulder. "I've never had a place to come back to," he said, voice rough. "Not really. Not until you." Annabeth turned. Her eyes were wet, but steady now. "And I never thought I could be chosen," she whispered. "Not after everything. Not after losing my boy. But when you look at me like that." He stepped closer. No ring, no flowers. Just a man who had given everything he had to children not born from him, and now stood before the woman who made that sacrifice feel like a life worth keeping. "You can't have children," he said, "but you've been a mother in every way that matters. I don't want you to teach them anymore." Her breath caught. "No? I want you to raise them. With me, as their mother, and as my wife." Silence, then tears, real, full, but soft. Annabeth nodded, one trembling motion. And Colt pulled her into his arms. There were no fireworks, no crowds. Just the hush of snow outside, and the steady beat of two hearts finding home. For the first time, she cried not from loss, but from love. Spring came like a quiet apology. After months of snow and hardship, the land softened. Buds swelled on branches, wildflowers nodded along the fence line, and the fields turned the shade of new hope. The Bennett Ranch, once a quiet place of rumor and whisper, now buzzed with life. Under the old oak tree behind the house, where the children had spent summer afternoons in dust and laughter, white chairs were set in rows. A table held 2 tin cups filled with lilac, a loaf of bread, and a pair of copper wedding bands shaped by the town's blacksmith. Annabeth stood at the edge of the clearing, her dress cream white, simple, hem grazing the grass. Her hair was pinned back, but a few loose strands caught the breeze. Nora tucked a wildflower into her sash, while Lottie, in a crown of daisies, held tight to her hand. Eli and Finn flanked her, solemn-faced, each holding one of her hands as they walked her down the makeshift aisle. At the front stood Colt. He wore a vest that had clearly been pressed and repurposed for the day. His hair was combed, boots shined, and yet nothing could outshine the light in his eyes. The crowd was small, neighbors, the preacher, folks from town who had once vouched for this odd little family. Some brought pies. Others brought tears. When the time came for vows, Colt took Annabeth's hands. "I can't promise you riches," he said, voice low but sure. "But I promise you this, every morning you wake, you'll know you're needed here. Wanted. Loved." Annabeth didn't speak for a long moment. Her lips trembled, but her smile held steady, and that was answer enough. In the weeks that followed, the ranch changed, not because of what was added, but because of what was shared. Annabeth began teaching local children beneath the oak tree, chalkboard propped between two barrels. Mothers from town brought their sons and daughters, leaving baskets of eggs or soap in thanks. Colt repaired saddles for neighbors, traded horses for seed, and welcomed every lost dog and runaway goat that wandered their way. The children, no longer just children, but sons and daughters, grew under the kind of love that didn't shout, only stayed. One golden afternoon, Annabeth sat on the porch, book in hand. Lottie napped nearby with a doll curled to her chest. Finn and Nora rolled marbles across the wooden boards. In the distance, Eli was helping Colt mend a broken bridle, fingers dark with oil, voices quiet and easy. Annabeth watched them all and whispered to herself, "I used to think my life had ended. Turns out, it was just waiting to begin again. With him." Colt glanced up, not having heard her words but sensing her gaze. Without looking away from the leather strap in his hands, he murmured, "You're not just their mother, Annabeth. You're the mother of this whole home." She blinked back the sudden rush of tears and said nothing, because sometimes love didn't need declaring anymore. It just needed living. The wind swept gently across the hills. Laughter echoed in the yard. Someone whooped, a chicken squawked, a kite lifted into the sky. Family was never about blood. It was about who showed up, who stayed, who held your hand in storms and rode out into them if needed. And on that porch, with spring thick in the air, and love settled deep in the bones of a once broken woman and a quiet man with too many children and more heart than most, they lived and loved forever. "Thank you for riding with us through the heartfelt journey of," she said, "I can't have children." The cowboy smiled. "Good, I've got enough kids for both." If this story touched your heart, if you believe that love doesn't require blood to make a family, only the courage to care and the will to stay, then don't forget to hit that hype button, subscribe to the Wild West Love Stories channel, and share this video with someone who needs a little reminder that home is built with love, not walls. We've got more tender, powerful cowboy romances coming your way. True stories of grit, healing, and second chances under wide-open skies. Until then, ride gently, love deeply, and remember, sometimes the wildest frontiers are the ones inside the heart.